Thank you for joining us again first thing in the morning. I know some of us had a more vibrant evening than others, but I'm really grateful for everyone here. And if you're just joining us for today, whether online or in the room, we had a really great day yesterday. I'm very excited about the buzz I'm feeling about this project, and I'm so grateful for everyone's support. So thank you for being here.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, thanks for everyone coming. Yeah, again, yesterday was really good. Hopefully for some of you, for most people here, it's probably their first in-person event for Framework because we've had two. This is our second. But I think it's been interesting to talk to people and see what you took from it versus not. And hopefully it's feeling really valuable for you. Something we talked about today and yesterday a little bit is that everyone was kind of existing through the workday still and trying to kind of like fight away emails and stuff. But hopefully today on Saturday it's a little bit more calm for you and you can kind of dig in. If you saw Ben's talk at the end of the day yesterday, it's definitely a reminder of this is a community and it's our own community, so it's only what we make out of it. So really take the opportunity to meet someone you haven't met before, really go dig and talk to people and really engage because that's why we're all here. It's really worth it.
And I don't know about you, but I'm personally almost overwhelmed with the level of support and people asking to help. And so every time we put one of these projects together, whether it's the online events we did in 2020, moving ourselves into an in-person event last year, every time we get through one of these, I find myself thinking, oh, this is actually where it gets harder. Like you build up to presenting and you think you've accomplished the thing, and then you realize, no, this is where the real work begins. So all of you ready to like jump in, roll up your sleeves and see what we turn this community and this momentum into. Um, we are charting this course together. I don't know what to tell you to do quite yet, but please keep engaging with us. We're going to find these solutions together. I know in the talk we started with yesterday, we not only have things to talk about as far as our perspectives on our work and how we relate in the community, whether it's client education or new talent education or mentorship within our own community. As we're saying here now, there's a lot of learning that can happen just together in this room. So please make sure you're talking to someone you don't know today. I think that's the best way we can use this day together.
For sure. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you weren't here yesterday, or you're just joining us, or you don't remember because of your night last night. In the morning, we'll be in the Studio A for most of the panels. Most of the conversations will happen here. Our vendors and sponsors and awesome folks are out in the lobby. You can visit them at any time. At around noon, we switch into two sort of paths back and forth. So something will be happening in B and A. Please, check the schedule, see what you're interested in, and try something you maybe are not interested in to learn new things. We will close the doors when those two panels go, so you can always walk in the back where Devin is standing at the moment. There's a nice little walkway that way where the restrooms are and stuff like that. And then throughout the day, again today, the Kodak building will be open if you need a quiet place to go work or take a phone call or anything like that. That's also where lunch will be again. So just a little bit of housekeeping.
Yep. Uh, I had a thought and it's completely gone from me now.
QR codes.
Oh, QR codes. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
We
yeah.
are QR code users. If you are looking for more detailed information off the program, there is a QR to take you to the online descriptions of all the presentations today. Also, your badge has your V card information so that you can get in touch with each other after the event today. So I think we should
That's a
get
very
started.
convention-y thing, but super valuable. If you want to talk to someone, just like take their contact info. It's great. It's really, really helpful how you let you be able to follow up.
Plus, if you follow the QR code to our schedule, it's also where we post information about Framework as an entity, our mission statement, and our goals. So I invite you all to take a look at it, get in touch with us, and we can talk about how we can work together in the future. For now, I'll turn it over to JT.
Awesome. Thank you. We're going to start our first presentation of the day. If I can invite Sam Cannon up to the stage. Thanks, everyone. I'll grab a handheld for Sam as well. Here it comes. Awesome. All right, welcome, Sam.
Thank you.
Sam is a collaborator with us here at Extra Studios, and if you missed, I keep on referring to Ben's talk because I'm biased, but if you saw Ben's talk yesterday, he talked about maps and your relationship maps and how you get to know one person that makes another person, which is another person, I actually know Sam through Framework, through Shelly. So Shelly in New York said she knew Sam from time at World Stage and all these other places like that. That connected with another map, which we held a Women in Media event and all sorts of stuff like that. So this organization is about, it's not about who you know or your LinkedIn, like Ben said, but it's about like finding these connections and growing your people. And so I'm happy to say that we've become people, which is great. So we're going to talk a little bit about creative discovery through real-time production. And just to get into some introductions, maybe Sam, you can talk a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Sam Cannon. I'm a photographer and director. I maybe have a bit of a, I don't know, infancy with this kind of technology. So I'm certainly coming into it, seeing it as a new tool for me that I'm very, very excited to start using in my work. And I'm really trying to champion with the clients that I work with and help educate folks about what's possible with it. But yeah, I would say that like my position here sometimes feels like I'm just happy to be here. And there's a little demo reel of some of my work to try to get a sense of who I am. But I wear a lot of different hats. I'm not always great at my elevator pitch because I just love learning new things constantly and playing with new tools and collaborating with new people. But I think an easy description is that I work across photo, video, and installation. Working as a photographer and director, and then doing video and multimedia installation, which is how I've been really fortunate to meet really incredible folks like Shelly and a lot of people in this room. Getting to be here yesterday and see a lot of familiar faces really was kind of like a pinch me moment of understanding how fortunate I've been to be more immersed in this community as someone who is an image maker.
For sure. And we spoke a lot while preparing for this, whether, Laura and I have a no victory lap rule. And I even talked about this on stage yesterday. It's really hard to speak about your work without doing that, and your work is incredible and beautiful, but it is really helpful for the room to see what you've been doing to kind of understand what your sphere is. So it's just an interesting tidbit because now I'll show a bit of XR Studios work as well. And again, it's not of a, hey, look how cool it is. It's more of just like, look at what's happening with this technology. Look at what the different types of tech is being applied for different ways. Because I think that's the only way you can really have a conversation about it, for sure.
It is very cool though.
Yeah, this is the problem. Everything's always very cool. Everything everyone does in this room is cool, which is the problem. But we'll play that real quick.
I want you on my rack. I want to make you ring. I want you to unwrap. I want to pull your string. Bring me the next shiny new thing. 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 Bring me the next. Shiny new thing. Bring me the next shiny new thing. Bring me the next shiny new thing. Bring me the next shiny new thing.
Cool. Everything's cool. But it's interesting to see, that's all that video show stuff that's happened in here since this facility opened in March. And what's interesting for that conversation is that the variety of things is so bizarre and strange in production that we all deal with. And how do you make all this tech work and the design process work for all those different areas? So to kind of go through it, maybe we could talk a bit about some of the stuff that we've done together. So maybe you can set up this one a little bit, maybe.
Absolutely. Is anyone here familiar with Leo Callion's music? Maybe some people have seen them on their TikTok explore page or Instagram. But I first came across Leo because they do these really incredible kind of like Bollywood pop mashups that are really beautiful, and got to meet them in Hollywood for the first time a while back and really wanted to photograph them but wasn't sure what we should do. And the timing worked out where we were really fortunate to be able to test on stage B and use the LED back wall to do some experiments. And I had a little bit of time to test on the stage and was going to try to gather as many learnings as I could for other projects moving forward. And what I really wanted to test in being able to shoot on one of these for the first time was a little bit of video and really shooting digital stills and film stills to try to understand how kind of space is compressed. And I was really interested in, what kind of pixelization or moire you might see. And I came into it with like some very kind of technical, specific questions that I wanted to understand, but then also just really wanting to understand what it is like in real time to kind of play in that environment. We all know that things can like move much faster than you anticipate them moving when you actually get to use a new tool for the first time. And so this was just kind of a fun first experiment to kind of dip my toes in. Yeah.
And I think for us, it's something really interesting as a collaborator coming into the space, because you come from a design background with VFX chops and also the stuff like that. Sam showed up with, hey, I'm going to bring a couple images, and then you generated 40 images the night before, the day before, whatever, in Midjourney, right? And it was like, or partially, and it was just like, oh, there's a whole new approach coming into stage as well.
Yeah, it's kind of a complicated feeling because it did become this use case of like, okay, now suddenly I have this opportunity to shoot on a stage for the first time, and I want to try to have these environments, but I don't have any time and I don't have anyone that I can collaborate with to turn them around. And so that kind of felt like a perfect example of being able to just try to like generate something very, very quickly and experiment with that tool for the first time. But then also because of all of the complicated feelings around it, I was like, I don't really know what I feel comfortable making in this and showing and like referencing of potentially other people's work. And so I wanted to go for this kind of more like painterly traditional studio backdrop and kind of use the image almost as more like a lighting element or something that could kind of fall off into the environment, and then be able to use the stage for the first time as a lighting element and understand what that's like. And so for this image, for example, that the stage is doing a ton of the work for lighting, but then I also was really interested in learning what it feels like to mix the stage and a little bit of continuous light with strobes, because as a photographer, a lot of the time I'm using strobes in my lighting. And so for this, we do have a single strobe that's popping off in the foreground to create some additional separation. And there were a lot of learnings from that as well.
For sure. And this kind of, I'm going a bit out of order, but this kind of led to another thing that feels very similar, which, on the space, using screens and projection and stills and stuff like that is not necessarily new, but with screens and stills, but it is interesting to see how it can manipulate and now become a tool that on a very, very short notice, you can pull that trigger. And so that's what this was. It was very fast.
Yeah, I do. My background is in photography, and then I have a lot of self-taught visual effects skills in my toolkit, and I have a lot of experience working with green screen, and that's really just out of necessity. I've done a lot of test shoots and editorial work in my own studio space where talent would have the amount of space, of like a wingspan, they can't really move. So I use a lot of green screen there. But I have really been trying to push to do a lot more practical in-camera VFX. And for me, it's always been a really hard thing to sell to clients, which can feel frustrating at times because I can get someone to say yes to green screen like that, even though they won't be able to see it in real time. There can be some crunchiness that comes with it, and being able to like explain to someone what this can look like, especially if they don't necessarily want to do something that's like an over the top kind of shiny CGI build. Sometimes it's hard to explain to them why something like this could be really beautiful and valuable. And the Leo Callion shoot ended up being the thing that I could really use to show that and explain what that can feel like. And then that led to getting sign off on using that approach for this shoot, which is coming out next week, I think, which I'm very excited about. But you're getting a little bit of a sneak peek. So this is actually some behind the scenes for the next cover of Wired that's coming out this month. And we shot on this stage, or no, on stage B.
Yeah.
So we as a lighting element, we were using the back wall also to show the images that we were creating on the back, the overhead continuous lighting that's a part of the space. And we didn't end up using any strobes at all for that one. We used all continuous for an exclusively stills shoot on a stage, and then shot most of the final images on film too, which was just a fun, like, constantly mixing technologies to create these images that feel very kind of like Metropolis inspired, otherworldly, unreal space.
And I think that's part of it, and we'll dig into it a bit here in a minute, but like, again, yeah, using film for stills is a really interesting conversation on this, but also there's physical set pieces, there's the little steps, there's you know, all the stuff like that, but when you were working in the space, you were crafting and moving things as if you were a set designer in real time. Like, hey, let's move that giant thing over to the left, let's do this. And I think that's what's interesting about the tech and the conversation today is the time scale that you have is very short for a project like this. So normally you would go and say, hey, let's shoot in a hotel room or an Airbnb or whatever, and let's just, like, you know, get it done and we'll touch it up and do stuff later. What if the technology gets faster so that the design process can get faster as well, and then you can do something new in that time? And I think that's what is really interesting with this, and same with the next one as well. Like, I think how do we do something fun and playful maybe on this one, which is something different to chat about.
Yeah, totally. I also, before we hop into this one, I think another thing that's really interesting is just because I'm very adamant about not removing people's jobs in any way, but I do really love making people's jobs easier for everyone on my crew, and also allowing them to focus on the areas that they're going to be really excited about. And so for the Wired cover shoot, we did have an incredible production designer, Wesley Goodrich, who could really, you know, it's a fast turnaround. It's a very, very quick lift. It's editorial. There usually aren't very big budgets. And so it's very cool to go into a space like that with the production designer, with the lighting designer, with our grips and our gaffs, and be like, okay, you know, these elements, like lighting the backdrop, we can take that off of your plate. Creating this background image, we can take that off of your plate. And then you can focus on these specific things. And so that's something as a photographer and director I found really rewarding about working in this space is just kind of seeing where we can kind of redistribute some of the lift too.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that's the thing with time is it's people's time as well, and you can only have, you know, the pipe that you have. So if one thing gets faster, what else can you unlock with it, with real time versus, you know, just adding another thing to the list, basically.
And then this project is a fashion campaign that we shot on this stage, on stage A for Cash App, who has a clothing line, which I didn't really know. Sometimes it feels like a bit of a Mad Lib.
It's like the most
Fashion
2023
campaign
sense. So I don't know if does everyone know what Cash App is? I'm not that, I wasn't that familiar, but it's like Venmo or something, right? You send people money on an app. They have a clothing line to help.
It's very stylish.
I don't understand. I don't get it.
It's very cool, and they make a lot of really beautiful, very cool content around it. And they wanted to reskin their site and shoot a ton of pieces, shoot video, shoot stills. So it was a huge lift of how much we wanted to capture in a single day. And originally we were talking about shooting this just on a white cyc in a studio and maybe projecting some content on the walls, or maybe trying to do some kind of like roto or keying out in certain moments to bring in some graphics. I was like, what if we could do it on a stage like this and, you know, use the stage in a way that people don't often consider, use it as something that's really, really graphic and, you know, isn't trying to represent a real space or recreate anything, but is really this just kind of like fun, saturated, you know, world. And then we got to work with a really incredible designer, animator who's here, Chris Golden. Hi, Chris.
Hey,
Hi,
Chris.
Chris. Who created these really, really incredible animations that we could kind of flood the world with. And that being able to use a stage this size as not only a lighting element, but an animated lighting element was very, very cool. Everything looked so stunning. And we captured an insane amount. I brought the schedule.
Oh my God.
I brought a screenshot of it, which don't say that this is possible. I'm never gonna show this to a
What
potential
is the problem?
client.
Yeah, tell clients what's possible.
Yeah, no. This isn't we shouldn't always work this way, but the fact that we were able to work this way is really incredible. And shout out to Megan Chumbley, my AD, for not only creating this but keeping us to it. But okay, first shot, look 1, shooting stills on white, 2 minutes. Second shot, full body video on white, 2 minutes. 5 minutes for lighting tweaks. Then we shot video on graphics, first look, 5 minutes. 3 minutes pickup after that. I mean, every single shot on this schedule, we had like 2 to 5 minutes to capture everything and move forward. And it was insane, blasting music. Everybody was having a great time. The only way we could have it move forward in a way that wouldn't be completely chaotic was to have a talk with the talent beforehand. We're never going to call action. We're never going to call cut. We're just going to hang out and play all day, and there's always going to be something shooting. And the final images and video that we got, it was a completely different kind of energy than I've ever been able to capture before, because the stage wasn't just this backdrop, it was a space that we were playing in, and that was very cool.
I think that's the fun part of it. As we're talking about things that are real time or near real time, you know, this is one that it wasn't live rendered graphics, but it was using disguise. And for a lot of people in this space, their whole career has been doing D3 or disguise or other media servers to modify stuff in real time. But in a setting like this on a shoot or in a fashion world, having a team like our lovely folks at XR who were able to say, no, I'm going to project this one, or this is going to be flat, or I'm going to flip it and invert it and stretch it and do this and all sort of stuff like that in a shoot, like that's something that it's like, oh, hold on, pause, let's do a reset. Whereas like it just felt like play in this space, which I think is really fun. So let's watch it real quick.
There's also our DP Patrick Jones had the great idea of working on a Sony Venice with the separated body, so that he could have this like very light handheld camera and be on here with talent, kind of playing around, and they were all just kind of dancing with one another, and it was just very cool to see the space used as this immersive environment, not only for what we're seeing in camera, but for the crew, for all of us. I'm like laying on the floor photographing right here. It's all encompassing in a very cool way.
And that's even like, you know, we were talking about the definition of what real time is, and Laura's written a book on real time. We've all talked about real time in lots of different ways, but if you kind of turn the phrase on its head, the camera operator using that Venice, I don't know if you guys have seen it, it's called is it the Rialta? I can't remember what it's called. The body of the camera stays here, and you can disconnect it with this nice cable.
Long cable.
Yeah, it's like 20 meters or something, really long. And then they just kind of have a sensor with a lens on it. So all of a sudden the camera operator, the camera is over there, and he has like a little lens and a sensor, and then a light strapped onto his Steadicam rig, right?
He didn't even have a steady.
It was
He's
just like
holding
just
it.
holding
Yeah.
a light and a camera and this, walking around where you're shooting and this is stuff, and it's just like it's kind of chaos, but it's also kind of what creation should feel like. It feels like you're playing with Play-Doh or something in real time, and I think that's what's really interesting about it versus just like, ooh, pretty picture, pretty picture. It was just discovery and playing with the tech, showing it not perfect. Like this image on screen, I love seeing the image skewed and stretched like that. That's fun. It'd be hard to actually create that in another environment, whereas some of us who are always trying to create a perfect image, sometimes we're like, oh no, it's not exactly this right thing, but that's okay. You know?
No, totally. Yeah. And even like seeing the texture of the floor, understanding that it's all real, or like the horizon line in the background. I really loved all of that and didn't want to hide any of it.
For sure. And so I think to kind of like, you know, keeping mindful of the topic and of the time, you know, bringing it back together is kind of what we were just talking about with like, it isn't about necessarily rendering in real time or all sorts of stuff like that. It's that real time interaction and how do you actually design things with time and knowledge, time in mind. And something that I was just thinking about the other day was like, when you're designing things, there's all these different steps, like, and real time or sort of near real time or much faster and new efficient technologies allows you to affect all these different steps. So on the design side, you're able to now design in a quicker or different way using AI tools or real-time rendering or whatever it is. But it also affects the rendering and the export and the authorization of stuff, as well as delivering to the client. And, you know, maybe we'll talk a bit further, but like, not all of those things are good, not all those things are bad. If your delivery time is now a third of what it should have been, maybe that's a bit sad, but maybe that's okay because you have more time to design now. The problem is sometimes when it all gets squeezed, but I think it also just creates something different. It's not necessarily good or bad. I do want to riff a little bit and talk more about AI like we were talking about before, and I just saw Pinar walk in. The team at Seihan Lee is here now, which is great. So XR Studios, little self-plug, but we worked with a team called Seihan Lee to create an AI tool in the space last October And there's some stills from it with Aaron Altmark at the bottom, who's here as well. And it was a tool in its earliest conception of text-to-image generation. Everyone would kind of, I think the world kind of knows what that is a bit now, of like you write a sentence and it creates a magical picture, great. The great idea from the Seihan Lee team was how do you use this in a space like this or similar to actually shoot with and do productions with. So it was a tool that was created to create 2.5D layers with in-painting and out-painting, so you get a little bit of parallax, right? So like Disney's multi-plane camera where you get the Snow White effect and get a little bit of that separation. And there's some really stunning images created, like that one on the right, even very, very early on. You'll hear more about their tool later, and there's some really interesting stuff that comes with that. But I think our conversations about that tool was more about creating freedom on set, and I think that's for me what I really like when talking about real time and AI is like creative iteration versus oh, let's make it faster, faster, faster. It's like, oh, what else can we do? So what if we're in this, beautiful rocky mountain scene, and then let's see what the same thing looks like underwater real quick, just type away, and it's more of a Kickstarter to conversations, which is really interesting.
I think it also, in trying to actively figure out where I feel comfortable implementing it and what um, which I feel like my own feelings, like all of ours, are kind of shifting day to day. But I think there is an interesting conversation about decision fatigue and the ability to constantly change something. And when you're doing it in an ideation phase, that's one thing. But I think a lot of us have experience going into post and having the idea that you could make unlimited changes to something once you're in post production is terrible for everybody. It abuses people. I think decision fatigue is a real thing. I think it doesn't necessarily lead to the best possible version of what you can make. So to be able to quickly create options beforehand and explore ideas, I think can be really helpful. But then I do think it also brings it back to the idea of shooting on a volume, because then to get to that place and be able to do in-camera VFX and then leave with something that's half baked in that you can't make changes, or even fully baked. I find that more freeing,
Yeah.
even to like, let's all get to a place where we feel really good about this and then can move forward instead of just like constantly spinning in the same place.
I think that's the thing when it comes to uh, I'm trying to find the right words for it. You create a structure, and within it, you can play, right? And so I think actually, little tangent, sorry, but one of my first jobs out of school was working at a symphony in Miami called the New World Symphony, and we would create projection mapped visuals using Coolux, way back when, using Coolux. And the interesting thing about doing a symphony and doing projection or symphony, which a lot of people here work in opera, music, and stuff like that, is that musical scores are actually one of the best ways to allow for creative freedom and expression while maintaining an overall vision and journey. And Michael Tilson Thomas, who's the director there, always said that a symphony is like going to a national park. Like, you can walk through it, most of the trees are there, some things have changed, but the overall rocks and mountains are always there. And we used scores, which would allow you to change tempo and speed and time, but the overall idea remained the same. So instead of doing a time-coded piece of pop music, I would have 600 cues in a symphony or something like that, and would be essentially playing along as it would change. And so I think that kind of leads into the next thing, which is talking about, again, real-time design and real-time choices. We want to maintain this sort of overall path. Well, what if we could play on the inside? And it doesn't have to be always, real-time doesn't have to be a giant 3D sphere ball on a render that looks really video gamey and cool. It can be all sorts of stuff. And some of the talks we heard yesterday can be lighting, it can be physical set, it can be automation things that move. And so something I wanted to talk about that was important to me was using real-time rendering from a lighting perspective on this Kanye tour a long time ago. Was the most physical of elements, which 1,400 park cans, we want to talk about timing shifts and what's real time and what's not. Changing all the gels on those every night for every show was very interesting for everyone. Every crew member learned how to cut and change things because every night the design is different of the color. But a very traditional tool, which is park cans, and then mixing in all these other new things that you just never hear about or would never knew were there. So most of the lighting on this tour was driven through Notch and Touch Designer. And probably didn't have to do it like that. We could have done a effects engine in the MA and done something different, but it was a choice to allow structure over time, but flexibility in the middle. And Mike Dean, the music director and keyboardist, would play things throughout the show, and it would affect both the live IMAG effects, but also the lighting. But the automation cues would be this long structure, if that makes sense. So just a little quick example, but it's just showing that things can shift and change and find creative freedom while retaining structure, which is something we talk about a lot. So here's a little eye candy from that. At the end there, you can see he's kind of, as he's playing all sorts of stuff, it gets really random, but all of that sequence was predetermined, but time could change, velocity, all sorts of stuff like that, as well as it affecting the sort of live IMAG on screen. So again, it's not about the tech because no one even knew that there were other tools involved besides lighting in there, but it just allowed for a different set of expressions, which is really interesting. And so as we were going through different examples together of like stuff in the studio, this is obviously very much out in the world. Also the most entertaining thing ever is like watching people go to that show for the first time and trying to find the stage was just incredible. Like people just running around in circles. Another very, very different example that we were talking about that's similar to the Cash App thing is like, what are things that are near time and what are things that aren't necessarily rendered in real time but allow you to iterate and play? And there's a piece here that's actually from myself and Ben Nicholson from way back when, and Ben Kitely, who is unfortunately not here, but a big part of this community, was, how do you retain flexibility and change ability, and how do you do all sort of stuff while still creating an image that is completed and successful and all sorts of stuff like that. So this piece was done very theatrically but also done like Photoshop basically, which is something I think for you is very familiar. But that castle, for example, the giant emerald city or whatever, was always kept as a separate layer so you can move it per shot and change the scale and stuff like that. And everyone who's in theater is like, yeah, duh. But when it's for a camera, it's kind of a different approach. And that led to a lot of really interesting things like Disguise or D3R11 or whatever version that is with colors still. But Ben Kitely's timeline had all of these different things and tools and stuff like that to remain flexible at every moment. So each one of the little fans and vents and steam were always on different cues and triggers to allow for flexibility throughout that process. And I think I'm really hearkening back to something a long time ago, but it just kind of shows that we're all just reconnecting again, whether it's in the theatrical space or in shoots, if that makes sense. And yeah, I think it's just something that we're starting to see more in the shoot and production in single camera space, a lot of these tools that have existed forever in this space. And everyone can thank Ben Kitely for Disguise being able to scroll up in the taskbar. So it didn't used to do that. I want to talk a little bit, I'm jumping around a lot, apologies, but talking about your use of film on stage, I think is something also that is like, that is time, right? And maybe you can speak a bit about how that affects all of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely like film fetish is real. I think being a photographer, like I want to shoot it on film because I just want to shoot it on film because that's really fun and beautiful, and I love seeing how it compresses space and color and the dynamic range of it, and I went to school at RAT, so like Kodak is in my blood, and I'm forever that the Kodak is my football team basically. But I think also, in listening to Eric Alva's talk yesterday, which I'm, still jazzed on. I remembered the fact that one of my first jobs when I was in college was working in cloud tanks. Also, so I very like practical visual effects is something that I've always been really, really excited about. And for me, I think the reason why I love kind of creating these worlds and shooting them on film is to really the two biggest things is like being able to prove that it was all really in camera, which might seem obvious, but I think to a lot of people it is this kind of like subconscious thing that you see it and then you understand in a different way that this was a thing that was captured and was a real moment in time. But then I also just there's time itself. There's this like extension of these different technologies moving forward and backward and being able to speak to each other in a way that I think is really poetic and beautiful. And I think in a lot of industries, technology changing and moving forward can be really scary for people. People can easily think that something is less valuable than before, or it's become more commercial, or it's become more a tool for communication and it's lost a bit of its artfulness. But I love coming from a photo background because that is the history of photography. The history of photography is photography like constantly fighting for the fact that it is an art form.
Yeah.
Every single iteration of it wasn't considered an art form until someone like fought for it and decided that it was. And I find that really freeing because in understanding that history and understanding that like black and white photography wasn't art until it was, and color photography wasn't art until it was, it lets me throw out that entire rule book and think that everything has value. Every new tool and old tool can come together to make something really beautiful. So aside from just like technically wanting to understand the difference between what I would see on a stage shooting film versus digital, there's that history to it, which I find really interesting.
I think it's also like when we talk about time, I think Luke Hall spoke about this last year at Framework, is like you can go as fast as you want, but sometimes you need to just think for a second and be really decisive with your moments. And something about shooting on film is like, I am choosing right now to do something and I'm not going to find out if it worked or not until later. And I think that's really, really important, either for stills. And there's another photo here we did a 35 mil shoot last week with Kodak, and it was just like, all right, everyone, like check the gate. Like, I don't know, like does it, I don't know, like here we are. And I think that's really, really cool.
I think it also goes back to the idea of protecting your team too, which I know a lot of people have been talking about. I think that as things can happen faster and we can make more changes, we all have to fight to mean that that doesn't mean we all move faster. I think those things can set us up to be able to actually slow down and take our time and have room to experiment in a way that I hadn't really had for years, other than those kind of recent shoot experiences. So, yeah, I think that's an important thing for everyone to keep in mind and to fight for at every point in the industry.
I think it's something that segues into this, which is like you and I have talked a lot about like working on these real-time spaces and with, yes, LED screens, but even out in the field or out in the world doing something, it's like, how do you get to that discovery using this faster technology versus, I mean, Cash App is maybe a bad example because we did squeeze it, but it was to discover things and to look at different things and do different setups. And like, there is this balance, like you say, but what I think is interesting is like, my interest in this technology and with Notch in early days and stuff only comes from like, what if, or what else, maybe is a good term. So we were talking about this example with the shoot last week of like, it sounds so silly, but moving a tree on set in real time is really satisfying, like from a creative standpoint. Like, and you just do it all day long. Ooh, look at this. But like, it's so interesting. Like, we can change an entire composition of a shot. And Alex Vicente, who's over in Studio B today, was just playing with the director on that shoot of like, what if we had a mountain? Hold on, like, just like extruding it. What if there's I think you brought a wheelbarrow in at one point or something, but it was just, it brings this sort of like playful, childish, adventurous thing, which creates a really beautiful product, which I think is something that you really focus on.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, like seeing beautiful volumetric light carved through something is always so satisfying. And I think it makes me think about just being able to have those experiences with other people. Because I mean, like I'm a big Andrew Kramer like VFX video fan. Like
Andrew Kramer here.
Andrew Kramer, yeah. I've started too many mornings just like watching a YouTube tutorial to learn a new After Effects thing, and so like I've watched a lot of videos of trying to learn how to create that sense of volumetric light in post just using 2D layers in After Effects. And I really wish that I had been there to see this in person because the idea of like having that experience, but not just being like alone in a cave by myself watching it, it just I don't often get to have this like larger sense of community when creating in that space, and so I'm very excited for these tools to like allow all of those things to happen in a room with other people and not just like me alone watching an Andrew Kramer video.
I think that's like such a good point though, because like that's been one of the biggest joys for me over the last 4 years working in all this virtual space is that I come from, a live world like that. Doing something real time with the Kanye example is like instant gratification for everyone. Like turn on the pretty light and everyone goes ooh, like it's so instant and so shared as an experience. And when you're in live shows, you get this gratification that like is why a lot of people stay up all night per Ryan and Laura's talk, is that you get this feeling of watching 60,000 people freak out. Like it's amazing. It's hard to recreate that when you're by yourself as an editor, as a VFX artist, or even in virtual production sometimes. There was a moment where Scott Miller and I had this crazy conversation after the VMAs in 2020, because we did it in XR during earthquakes, fire, tornadoes, the pandemic, brownouts. Like it was just absolute chaos. And it happened. And then at the end, they're like, okay, pack up, bye. And like everyone just leaves. And like, it's just, there's these moments where you don't get this joy in the same way. But with real-time tech and with real-time technology, you're allowing that sort of amazing moment as a VFX artist. You're now doing that with grips and gaffers and production designers who've never seen that before, and now all of a sudden they get to share in that experience, which I think is why a lot of this tech is just starting to bleed in a lot of different ways in the live audience space, which is something I think you're interested as well and do a lot of work in also.
Yeah, very much so. I also just I've gotten to see two different times now. The first time that like a DP gets to see and understand the idea of throwing up cards for lighting on the screen, and that's so beautiful. Seeing it in their eyes, like giving someone a Christmas present in the morning, where suddenly they're just like, "Ooh," and something clicks, and it's very cool.
It's always super fun. And I think that's what we're seeing and what we're getting at in a space like this is uh, taking what's here and getting it out into the live world. It's, again, kind of obvious for the attendees of Framework because a lot of people are from the live space and going back and forth. But it's been so satisfying to watch and see people learn real-time stuff in a different space. And I think it's just going to start growing and changing. And maybe that's kind of the segue to the end here of, for you in your career, like, what do you think is next, and what do you think with this technology you've seen in here or at home, where is it going to go for your other experiences that you do out in the world maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, we'll always have to be reactive to things and see what kinds of jobs are available and make interesting things where we can. Um, but I think I have a photo background because that's what I knew and what I understood, and a way for me to kind of get into the industry of creating things and working with teams at this scale. But if I could have gone back in time and like showed myself something else when I was younger, I would have really loved to go into theater design and lighting design. I think it was something that I just didn't really know existed and I wasn't exposed to. And now all of the things that I'm the most inspired by are in that world. And I think that's part of the reason why I have had a hard time kind of like finding a niche for myself. And I wear so many hats and I like want to learn all of these tools. I think it's because in the end, the thing that I am actually the most interested in is what's happening during the shoot, the experience that we're all making, and the thing, like seeing the illusion and seeing it all happen in that moment. The shoot itself is always the thing that I'm the most excited about, and the final images are beautiful, but to me they feel like a documentation of this magic trick that we all did together. And so I guess my hope and what I would like to manifest in the future would be that the lines between the kind of built experiences and the kind of beautiful experiential design and the way that we experience things in theater, and then what happens on set and what happens behind the curtain for image creation, that those lines just get blurred a lot more, and the spaces that we're able to create in uh, become larger and encompass everyone all together, and they can feel like these more kind of immersive beautiful experiences, so that you don't just end up having the version that is like the huge giant budget production build that creates a lot of physical waste and then goes away really suddenly, or this small hotel room that has a piece of paper on the wall and then somebody comps something into the background. I hope there's more things that exist in the middle that are just really beautiful positive experiences for everyone involved.
And I think you and I speak a lot about process usually in the space. Like you're very focused on the process, and I get super focused on the process as well as a lot of the more technical focused friends here are like, ooh, but what about this new plugin, this new tool, and this new thing? And sometimes I, you know, question, am I too focused on the process and therefore not focusing the end vision? But the process does kind of create the end vision sometimes, you know, and because we want to use, you know, we built the stage of these screens for one purpose, but people are starting to use it in really weird ways, and it's great. It's fun. It's really fun when people are taking their own process using it. So, I think, you know, we both were gaga over what Luke Halls did with the West Side Story. That was, I don't know, very few people got to see it because it opened right before the pandemic, but it was this gorgeous movie, like full budget motion picture film, basically on screen, intermixed with live IMAG orchestrated by Luke Hall's team and Zach Pellets and all these wonderful people. And it was just this weird blend of like pre-shot things, live things, all stuff like that. And I love that the conversation is going more towards, again, that mushiness versus like, oh, that's a pre-take thing versus, oh, this is live versus whatever. So
Totally. And like using tools to be able to manipulate scale and space and time in that way. Like I didn't get to see the show in person. I'm obsessed with the documentation of it that I've seen and think that it's really stunning. And I was really inspired by the idea of seeing a live performance and seeing a person at that scale, but then in real time also being able to like really see someone's close up emotion in a theatrical space. And like thinking about what it means to have a DP in a theater performance. And yeah, the more that all of those worlds blend together, the more excited I get.
for sure, totally agreed. Well, um, that's it for a time for us. Thank you so much. Hopefully we can keep talking about real-time stuff.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Do we have time for questions? I think so. I'm supposed to be running this room, but I'm on stage. I'm sorry, I didn't think about that part. Yeah. Pablo.
Thanks. I'm Pablo. um, it, it was really striking for me to hear you guys speak about, all of this, which is so new, using terms that to me feel so old, right? Like this is something that to me has been going on for so long in other disciplines. It reminds me so much of just, I would say, instead of real time, just structure improvisation, right? What's been happening in jazz since the beginning, or contact improv in dance, or device theater, physical theater, dance theater. And what makes me what I wonder about is, should we be inviting those people in? Should we be bringing those people who have been doing these kinds of structural improvisations in the real world without technology, or with different types of technology, into our world and help us discover what's next, right? Like that kind of collaboration with somebody who's so imbued with the talent for improvisation in their own craft. I think it would be like, it's just fascinating to me, the possibilities of what we could create together if we include more artists that are not necessarily part of our little club of technologists.
For sure.
Anyways,
Yeah, no, totally.
it was fascinating and beautiful talk and beautiful work.
Thanks, Pablo. Thank you.
No, I mean, I completely agree with that sentiment. And I think it's part of my responsibility when I'm setting up a team and when I'm planning out a project is to try to understand different folks that we can bring into those spaces. And that makes me think of like what I think is one of the most important roles on set. And a lot of times for clients, it's their first experience with that role, which is a movement director. It's really, really important to me to have a movement director on set because, and for people who don't know, a movement director can mean a lot of different things, and it's someone who oftentimes exists in a live performance space, concert tours, but for photo shoots and video work as well, someone who's there to, whether there's like specific choreography that your talent is going through, but for most of my jobs, there isn't any. It's really about me sitting down with this person and us talking about the vibe and the story that we want to tell, and then they can kind of help kind of build the visual language of the body in the way that our talent is posing and moving. And it seems really kind of silly and obvious, but it is the kind of role that I think a lot of times for certain types of productions people don't really consider. And for both of the shoots that I was lucky enough to do in this space, we had Quentin Stuckey, who has a background in ballet and modern dance, and to bring someone into a space like this and kind of think through different ways to imagine the human body posing and the way that the light bounces off of it, and just to have a different perspective of someone who isn't necessarily there to like look at the screen and see the final image, but to think about form in a different way. And that's just one example of someone. So I think bringing more people into spaces who have those kinds of different perspectives and have experience with improvisation is a huge point. Yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea.
I think it's also like there's something else that you're touching on, which is a big part of this group, and my more personal thoughts versus company thoughts is like all this tech has been here for such a long time, right? Like everything is like, it's so weird to watch in the very loud and noisy virtual production space. There's a guy, I think you'd be okay with me saying this because I give him crap about it all the time, but Tim Moore, who's a owner of View Studios, they have a bunch of View LED volumes in Florida and Vegas and Nashville and stuff like that. He called me once and he was like, you know what, we have these screens, they're great for shoots, but I'm doing these events and people are coming in person and they're looking at the screens with their eyes and they love it. So I'm just doing more of that. And so like he's discovered our entire industry from like the other way around, and it's great. And like kudos to him, and he's leveraging it in a good way. They do events, but for someone who's been like yourself, who's been like bleeding real time for so long, it's so interesting. But it is like, yeah, I don't know. It just comes in waves and seasons, so we just try to educate as much as we can. But getting other people in that space, I would love to do a shoot with just jazz, like saxophone players on every role, and just see what happens, because it'd be probably awesome. It sounds like a Tupac problem, probably. Yeah, I think we have time for one more. Thanks. Go.
Hey, I'm Soren. Sam, great to hear you talk about your work. Thank you for sharing. I encourage you never to pin yourself down or stop wandering. David Bowie said something like, the minute you know you're on safe ground creatively, you're dead. My question is about the Cash App thing. When you were doing 2 to 5 minutes per shoot, can you tell us about how you prepped the team for that? Did that come as a surprise to anybody? Was everybody ready for it? How much had you premeditated what was going to happen in those minutes?
It definitely wasn't a surprise. That would be horrible. It'd be the meanest thing I could do to anyone. No, it wasn't a surprise. The way that we prepared was to really strip down what was needed. There were no moving parts once we were on. It's also a safety thing, right? You can't have that many people moving around when you're going that fast. But we basically we went into it treating it that we were always on. We were always shooting in some way, and so we kind of it did become a bit more of like a live performance of the talent on stage, just kind of going through these motions. Our movement director tells them what they expect to see. We also weren't rolling sound, which is hugely helpful in that circumstance.
Big, yeah.
So Quentin can be off to the side, and it was so fun because we kind of played musical chairs a bunch. We had these objects that were on the stage. There's all of these beautiful looping animations that Chris made, and we have 4 talent that are all kind of sitting and doing these cool poses, and everybody's hyping each other up and being like, "You look amazing!" And there's music blasting. Our DP is standing in the middle of the room. Our AD calls that their 3 minutes starts. They're shooting video, and then as we get close to that countdown, which honestly, when you're shooting something that has that much movement, it's very dynamic. 3 minutes is a lot of footage. You have a ton of options then if that person can free float. So while it was a bit stressful, we also knew, okay, if camera is moving, talent is moving, background is moving, 3 minutes, that's a ton of options. That's actually a lot of different shots that we're going to have in that amount of time. And then as we get close to the end of those, then, the DP starts to pull out. I'm like, have my stills camera handed to me. I'm walking in and starting to like lie down on the floor because we have this amazing tall backdrop and everybody can look 10 feet tall. But it really did become this like larger dance that everyone was doing, and we got really good at it by the end of the day, and we like knew all of the motions. But it did leave so much room for play, because we would seriously just like have everybody posing, and then Quentin would scream like switch, and then everybody kind of gets up and moves to their different thing and like hits another pose. And it was one of, if I had seen it and I wasn't there in person, I would have been like, this sounds horrible, never let anyone on this team hire me to do anything. But we had so much fun. It was just like a huge party and very, very good vibes. Nobody felt like they were stretched to their limit. Nobody would have been asked to do anything that was like very physically taxing in that way. So yeah, it was safe and it was fun, and it left so much room for play, which was awesome.
I think it's also ironic that while that was happening in here, there was a panel in the other room about white balance with ETC. So very technical, very focused Tucker and all these other people like, well, let's talk about photons and bounce. And you would poke your head in here and be like, French house music, and just like, it was, but it's perfect. Thank you though. Yeah. I do think that's probably it for time. So thank you so much, everyone. Really
Thanks,
appreciate
everybody.
it. Thank you.
I'm gonna hang out, so yeah.
We'll be back in 10, 5. Back in 5 minutes. Thank you so much.